the Digital Media Classroom here at Wellington High School, welcome to another episode of Dialogue with the Dukes. I'm your host once again, Bill Berger, and the sponsor for today's episode is the Colonial Barbershop located at 121 West Herrick here in downtown Wellington. We're doing something that we haven't done for several years. We're interviewing the S.R.O. Officer Ben Hogan is our interviewee today, and he's going to be telling us all about what he does as the S.R.O., what the S.R.O. program is, and how it impacts the entire Wellington School District. So, Officer Hogan, welcome. Glad to see you here today.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, the S.R.O. program. What is it? What does it stand for? What's the aim and what are the goals of the S.R.O. program?
So the S.R.O. program stands for School Resource Officer, and it is just putting police officers in school. And it's not necessarily as an enforcement, it's more of a protection thing. The goal, of course, would be to keep everybody safe.
Mm-hmm. Now, you're responsible for all three schools.
I
So
am.
how do you divide yourself into three?
Well, as the kids here know, I spend a majority of my time here. I try to make it to every other school, the elementary school and the middle school, about 4 or 5 times a day, and basically just walk around. It's more of a showing a presence thing. Of course, when it comes to elementary and middle school, I'm not saying that there haven't been problems over there, but they're much less likely to occur over there.
Mm-hmm. In a situation where we didn't have an S.R.O. and we can all, watch the news, read the news, and all that stuff, there have been several instances of problems throughout the entire United States. And then Lieutenant Shelton was brought in, and we interviewed him. And from that point on, do you feel like having that presence in the school, or schools, I should say, actually provided that protection, or was it, did Wellington not need it? What's your feeling on that?
Well, it's one of those things. You don't think there's a need for it until maybe something happens.
Mm-hmm.
And law enforcement is incredibly reactive in nature. So I think this is a good proactive step.
Mm-hmm.
Just so people see us here and know that maybe this isn't the place to come cause any trouble.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, I just found out that you graduated from Midview High School.
I did.
We won't hold that against you. But you have been, you said you're retired now, but you were a police officer somewhere else.
I was with 2 departments in Southern California, the Chula Vista Police Department, which is right on the border, and then the El Cajon Police Department. I was with both those police departments for about 12 or 13 years.
Okay. So being right on the border, that had to, especially now, again in the news, especially recently, and again adding in COVID-19 and all that stuff, there must have been something special, or the events were much different on the border versus, say, in LA. Well, in LA, they have their own problems too, don't they? So it must have been something different, though, being right on the border.
We did. We had a lot of unique challenges being in border towns, and it had zero to do with immigration. I was a gang detective in El Cajon for a while,
Okay.
so we had some unique challenges as far as cross-border violence.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it really had nothing to do with immigration or where people stood on that. It was just dealing with the criminal activity that was unique to a border area.
Was there a lot of criminal activity?
There was.
Is that right? Really?
Yes, we were a very busy town.
Is that right? And did it have to do with like border crossings, or did it include border crossings, or was that totally up to the Border Patrol?
That is completely up to Border Control,
Okay.
or Border Patrol. San Diego PD did have a border crimes task force that other agencies participated on. They were essentially there to work in conjunction with the federal authorities.
Mm-hmm.
What was unique about the city that I worked in, we were a little bit east of San Diego, so geographically we were a little cheaper, which would bring in a lot of low housing issues, as you'll see in some of the outlying cities to big suburban areas. So we had a lot of unique challenges with that.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine. Well, the S.R.O. program itself, when it was instituted, it was supported differently than it is now. How is the S.R.O. program, money-wise, how is the S.R.O. program actually paid for?
Certainly, we are 100% funded by the school district.
Okay. Now, you talked about the fact that you were a former police officer. So you've had a lot of different types of training and so on. But there's got to be training that's different for being in a school district, or is it the same? And what kind of training were you involved in before you became the S.R.O. here?
So to become the S.R.O. here, there was no specific training. Ohio does have a training program for school resource officers, as did California. I would imagine they are probably both pretty similar. It's just more specific to dealing with student interactions and juvenile law, because dealing with juveniles and adults are a little different, and as well as stepping in to enforce policy or laws. And we're not here to do any sort of school policy. I'm not yelling at kids to take their hoods off or to take the earbuds out of their ears. It's strictly for us just safety of the kids, and no disciplinary actions.
And that's obviously a good thing. Well, I'm glad that you brought up the interaction, because that's my very next question. What has been, in your case, what has been the reaction, the students, the teachers, the parents? What has been the reaction for you being in the entire school district?
I haven't necessarily seen a reaction between the parents or teachers. From the students, I think it takes a little bit for some to warm up. But once they see at least a familiar face, a consistent face, and see that I'm not here trying to enforce anything or be big brother watching, I'm here to protect them, and also build those relationships with them, which I think is important.
So it's obviously it's got to be a friendly versus adversarial relationship.
Yes, and I really don't ever want anybody to see, an us versus them, especially when it comes to me. I never try to be intimidating. I understand that a uniform and a gun on someone's hip can be intimidating, but I truly want people to see me as just Ben. I don't introduce myself as officer, or when I was a detective, I was a detective Hogan. I've always been Ben, and part of the reason is to make people, I guess, see a little bit past the uniform and just try and connect with people more on a person-to-person basis.
Now, we didn't talk about this, but a question that came up in my mind, I know that at basketball games and probably football games too, not only, well, shall we say, we have representatives from the Lorain County Sheriff's Office that come in and they provide, I assume, security. How are you involved, if you're involved at all, with the athletic events here at the school?
Certainly, a lot of the athletic events, they'll have auxiliary officers come in, and they're officers, but they just don't carry a gun or arrest people. And I think it's more of a presence thing, but also if they do see something, they're of course equipped with radios, and they would just have quicker access if they needed police officers there for any sort of enforcement action.
And where do these auxiliary officers come from?
Usually the community.
Okay.
And we have, I think, 3 or 4 auxiliary officers right now. We're always looking for more. But they're great. We use them a lot during the fair. We'll use them during the sporting events. I've even seen them here at dances for the kids. And they're mostly volunteer, so it saves the taxpayers a lot of money, and they represent the community very well.
Well, I know, as I said, I know that the Lorain County Sheriff's Office is here too, because I know one of the sheriffs, and only because of a former job that I had here in Wellington. But yeah, I see him at almost every basketball game, so I know that they're involved also from the security aspect. Well, we talked about the program itself. Now, let's talk about a typical day. What do? You come in, here it is, the 26th of April. It's cloudy and kind of chilly today. So what did you do to start the day, and what will you, besides the interview?
Sure.
What will you continue to do today?
Well, I try and get here about 7:40, 7:45, a little bit before the kids. I usually stand out in front of the office and greet the students with some of the teachers. I would be out in the hallways, or try to be out in the hallways during every bell when the kids are in the hallway. Just, again, more of a presence. I enjoy interacting with the kids now, and I don't think that they see me as someone who's there to
Bust
get them
their
in any
chops,
sort of
bust their
trouble.
chops or something
Yes.
like that? Yeah, I see. Well, the final question about the S.R.O. before our break. Do you feel that the program is a success?
I do. Again, and I think it's a success. One, We haven't had any issues as far as any sort of outside presence coming and causing trouble, which is our main goal. Obviously, there's always going to be issues in a school setting, and that's not really under our control. But two, I think some of the relationships that I've built at the school will carry on into some of these young adults, adult life, and I think we'll also see dividends paid during the summertime when people aren't in school.
Well, before we go to our break, I digress. You have a very famous name, at least for people that golf or follow golfing. You have a very famous name, Ben Hogan. And Ben Hogan, for those of you who don't know, he was an absolutely outstanding golfer. He was a professional from 1930 through 1971. He is only one of 5 golfers, or was only one of 5 golfers, who won all 4 major events: the Masters, the PGA, the British Open, and the US Open. And as I say, only one of 5. So obviously your parents' last name was Hogan. Why did they decide to call you Ben?
Well, my father has been asked this many times, so I know the story.
You're good.
So as the story goes, when he was young, he was a golfer, and his friends would call him Ben, kind of in a joking manner. So he said he really liked the name, named me Ben, having full knowledge of what he was doing to me, and it just so happened that I turned out to be a professional golfer, and that's what actually took me out to California.
I see. What's your handicap?
I think I am a plus 2 or 3 right now.
Boy, that is professional. There's no doubt about it. And as I said, I have heard from other people that you are a fantastic golfer, and so congratulations for that.
Thank you.
Well, when we come back after this message, we're going to be talking about 3 real-world events that have happened in the last 4 or 5 months and how they relate to the S.R.O program. This is Dialogue with the Dukes.
Attention, do you want a haircut for an affordable price? Visit Colonial Barbershop, located in Wellington, Ohio, on 121 West Herrick Avenue. We do haircuts for people like seniors to young kids. We have a price of a regular haircut for $13, a veteran haircut for $12, a senior haircut for $11, and a head shave for $20. Also, if your beard does not look good for your girlfriend or your mom, we will have a beard trim for only $5. If you have a problem with your hairline or a problem with your hair and it grows too much, don't worry, we will fix you right up and get you looking fresh. If you look like you need a haircut and you're not looking fresh for your date night, call 440-752-1078.
When you need a haircut, I suggest going to the Colonial Barbershop, located at 121 West Herrick in downtown Wellington. They are one of the oldest, if not the oldest, barbershop in the state of Ohio, and certainly in Northeast Ohio. We've been talking about the S.R.O for the Wellington School District, Mr., or should we say Officer Ben Hogan. He has been talking about the S.R.O program, what's involved, what his prior training was and what his prior jobs were, and the fact that he was a professional golfer too. So certainly very interesting. Now I do want to get into some real world events and talk about the situations that have happened in 3 of them. But prior to that, I do want to ask you, let's say that right after this interview, all of a sudden a problem comes up. Without going into any specific detail, what's the protocol that takes place?
Certainly. If we get a call on my school radio that I carry around, I have access to all 3 schools through that radio. They usually request me. I would hope that they would say what the request is for. They're usually very good about saying if it's urgent or non-urgent. And if it's something that's urgent that I would need more backup for, as soon as I get the word, I will just, via my police radio, ask for another officer or 2 to head to where I'm headed and try and provide them with as much information as I can.
Yeah, as it turned out, there happened to be a police car from Wellington show up just as I was at school during this thing that we'll talk about later. I noticed something on your chest here. What is that?
That's my body camera.
I thought so.
Yep.
And that's on at all times?
It is. It's not recording at all times, but it's on, and all I need to do to activate it is just tap the front button twice. It'll actually go back 30 seconds prior to me activating it.
Okay.
So we'll capture the 30 seconds that occurred before that, but no audio, just video. Yes, just video.
Is that something that has taken place just recently?
So we had other body cameras here in Wellington. They were just a different manufacturer, probably not as good as the Axon. And I don't know when Wellington implemented their body camera program. I know the department that I work for in California, we went to body cameras probably 2016 or 2017-ish.
We have had situations, not here, but we've had situations where all of a sudden the body camera is turned off. Why?
It could be for any number of reasons. Obviously, one of the flaws, if you want to call it that, is this is completely dependent upon the officer turning it on or off. So whenever you have some sort of technology like that, it can be very easily manipulated. I have no doubt that there have been instances where an officer has turned off their body camera for any number of reasons on purpose. I've also had this accidentally turned off and on several times. I've been fighting with somebody, and if I had my body up against theirs and it holds the button in for, I think it's 3 seconds, then it automatically turns off. And this thing can also, I've had it fall off during fights too, which it'll still record, but it just might not show something from perspective.
Yeah, I see. Well, as I said, as I promised, we want to talk about 3 real-world situations. We had one situation, I can't remember the state involved, but it was near Christmas, and the parents brought the student a gun, and the gun was turned on some students at the high school, and parents were involved with, shall we say, hiding out, and then they were inevitably captured, and it has gone on from there. Without getting into a Second Amendment argument, because we don't want to do that, but your comments about situation with guns in school.
Certainly, obviously, guns really don't have a place in the school, except if you're an S.R.O or someone authorized to keep them. And as far as that situation goes, you know, it sounds like they had been determined to have some sort of culpability in that incident, whether they bought the gun for the kid or whatever. And yeah, so there's a lot of different rules or laws in different states, and it sounds like that they broke one there with their actions, and they'll definitely be held accountable for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, now I'm going to spring a question on you, which we didn't talk about, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to. Do you think teachers should be armed?
That's a good one. Yeah, and that's a tough one, because if you're properly trained, I guess, why not? I mean, I guess that's in a sense all I am. I'm just have a little bit more training than the average person. And if that were to happen, obviously there would be a bunch of protocol and stuff, because when you do bring more guns into school, it brings more probability that they could fall into the wrong hands, so that would need to be closely monitored. But for a properly trained person, then I would be just fine with that.
Yeah, well, training obviously is a very important thing, and the reason I asked the question is because it so relates to my former job being a commercial airline pilot, and we had certain pilots that went through called an FDO training, flight duty officer, and what it was they went through a big long course, but they actually actively carried a gun in the cockpit. Obviously, they would let the other crew member know, they would let the flight attendants know, and if anyone was either on board as a marshal, a federal marshal, or just commuting from one place to another, they always let the flight crew know. So that's why it's one of the questions why I asked.
Oh, certainly, and I've actually been through that training. I'm certified to fly federally armed and do expedition, so I know that is a good class, and like you said, it's a pretty intense training class,
yes,
specific to carrying a gun on a plane, which is a pretty big deal.
Yes,
so I have no doubt that the training would be very intense for teachers if we chose to go that route.
I hope so. I really do hope so. The second question, or the second situation, happened, I guess, just over the weekend or just prior to last weekend, up in Kenosha, Wisconsin, where there was I guess a fight, and the S.R.O. or one of the S.R.Os was thrown to the floor and then ended up putting his knee on this girl's neck for 22 seconds. your comments.
Well, I can say that in 2006, that was part of our training.
Okay.
And I think obviously with recent events, of more specifically the George Floyd incident,
Of course.
that everyone knows about, it looks terrible. I think the big thing with the George Floyd incident was that officer kneeled on that guy's neck for almost 10 minutes. I think that's the big issue. If you need to control somebody, sometimes our job does not look pretty. There's just no way you can get around it, especially if you're in a fight with multiple people. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do. I think specifically in the George Floyd incident was just kind of the egregious amount of time that hold was applied, and then the lack of any sort of medical care or due regard for Mr. Floyd's safety. So it never looks good. I don't know their specific training or their policy, but what I can tell you is a lot of times, especially when we need to use force, there's really no way to make some sort of use of force look good.
Well, the final incident, and this happened within the last 3 or 4 weeks, I believe, we had a skirmish in the cafeteria here at Wellington High School, and obviously you were involved. What happened as far, without going into details, but what happened as far as getting, calming the incident, the skirmish, and what was the protocol involved? I know you talked about being other officers coming in from the Wellington Police Department.
Certainly, yeah, we were just sitting in lunch in the teacher's cafeteria, and a teacher came in and said there was a fight in the cafeteria, so we all went down there. And as reactive in nature as my job usually is, by the time we got there, there was no active fight, so there was really nothing to do as far as break anybody up. I think teachers had everybody separated and already going to the principal's office for the school to deal with it. And with something like that, yeah, a crime took place. You're not allowed to punch or hit or try to inflict injury upon others. But in most incidents here, I think it's most appropriate for the school to handle it with any sort of school discipline. Obviously, if something got out of hand and it got a little bit more serious, and it would be more appropriate maybe to file criminal charges, I would absolutely handle it. But during that, it didn't rise to needing criminal charges and having that on someone's record for a scuffle in a cafeteria.
So it was good that we had an S.R.O, but the teachers, fortunately, had already, shall we say, taken care of the problem, and that's always a good thing too.
It's great.
Rather than prolong the situation or something like that. Well, we'd once again like to thank Officer Ben Hogan for coming in, the S.R.O for the entire Wellington School District, all 3 schools, and as I said, he's got to be divided into 3 parts every day that he comes in. So again, we'd like to thank you, sir, for coming in, and we appreciate you talking about the S.R.O program because it's been so many years since we had the opportunity to talk with the S.R.O here in the Wellington School District. We'll be back again very soon with another episode of Dialogue with the Dukes.